Good morning, everybody. Well, thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking about the CX slide, which, contrary to popular opinion, is not the latest wedding dance. We're going to talk about how you can move customer loss to customer loyalty. First off, who am I? I'm Peter Hornberger. My company is Brightmetrics. I've been in this world of contact centers for about 15 years. Many moons ago, as a contact center implementer, helping people like yourselves deploy these systems. More recently, I am in the data analytics space for contact centers, and that's what Brightmetrics does. To frame our conversation today, CX quality is in decline. There are hundreds of publications out there referencing this. Many of you have probably heard this and read the data around it. I, in particular, chose this graph from KPMG, which shows that across multiple segments, CX quality has declined the past couple of years. The reasons for this are varied and probably familiar to many of you. Perhaps some of you have had your CX budget cut over the last few years. Perhaps you've had hiring freezes and can't bring in the people that you need, but you're still expected to increase performance with those reduced resources. Or maybe you're looking at many of the emerging technologies, namely AI these days, that are here at this show, and trying to understand how these solutions can be implemented without disrupting your customer's experience. This trend in CX quality decline really matters, and here's why. According to the American Express Customer Service Barometer, half of Americans have ditched a planned purchase because they had a bad experience. And a third say that they'll consider switching after a single bad experience. Let that sink in for a moment. A third of your customers, 33%, will consider switching after just a single bad experience. On top of that, like I said, some of you are trying out new technologies. Our space has rapidly evolved over the past couple of years, and there's a massive wealth of new things that you can add into your customer experience strategy. But try this on for size. Forrester claims that a third of brands will launch experiences in 2024 that are biased, inaccessible, or harmful. Anybody done that yet this year? You don't have to tell us. That means that a third of you, just statistically, a third of you are likely to launch initiatives that in turn endanger up to a third of your customers. For a long time, people have asked me, oh, what do you do for work? So as if, I'm sure many of you get this too, it's an odd thing to explain. I've always turned to them and said, well, do you have a war story calling your cell phone provider or your internet provider? I usually name them, but I'll be kind in this show. Invariably, people's eyes go wide and they start to shake their head in grief as they remember their last bad experience with our industry. Long hold times, numerous transfers, pressing 0 repeatedly, trying to get out of an IVR that truly can't understand them. Customer experience matters because bad experiences drive measurable churn. But there's hope. Let me throw a few names in front of you that you're likely familiar with. Tesla has an NPS of 97. Nordstrom has for 15 years running been featured in Fortune's most admired companies. And Zappos literally wrote the book a long time ago now on customer satisfaction. What's the common thread between these companies? Well, these companies have immense customer loyalty and they have fantastic customer service. Tesla, they do at-home repairs. I'm sure you all know the story of Nordstrom, the guy that came in with his snow tires wanting to return them. And look, Nordstrom doesn't even sell snow tires, but they took them back. And then Zappos personally replies to every single email that's sent to them, all the way up to the CEO. And for me, years ago, they sent me the wrong size pair of shoes and gave me VIP one-day shipping for the rest of my life. I wasn't even mad. It was the greatest mistake they've ever made. Customers expect great experiences. Experiences that are efficient, personalized, empathetic, and accessible. And great experiences will make you stand out against your competition. Ultimately, oftentimes the customer service department is overlooked in a corporate strategy of customer loyalty, but we are a huge part of that puzzle. Great customer service can make you stand out against your competition. And today, I want to give you a few small but deeply impactful tips for how to drive great experiences. And look, I'm an analytics guy. That's where we're going to go with this. We're going to talk about analytics. It's famously been said, you can't manage what you don't measure. Fun fact about this quote, it's often attributed to one of two people, Peter Drucker or W. Edwards Deming, but the origin is actually unknown. But the point still stands. A key to driving great experience is knowing what to measure and how to take action on those measurements. For the rest of our presentation, I'm going to provide you with some key metrics that you can start tracking to drive great customer experiences so that your organization can swim upstream against this declining trend in CX quality. There's 2 points I want to make before we dive into the metrics. First off, there are a lot of things that people will tell you to track that are actually really hard to track. For example, first contact resolution or cost per call. There's a lot of complicated fuzzy logic that goes into tracking something like first contact resolution, and you typically need really good tie-ins with your HR system to get to cost per call. Those are good metrics, but most of you don't have the tools in place to measure those things. The metrics I want to show you today are things that you can walk out of here today and by the end of the day be looking at and measuring. My goal is to make these really attainable metrics. Again, not to say those other things are bad, but I wanted to give something that's really simple for you. And the second thing is I'm going to show you some real world examples today. I have permission from a real live customer of ours to show off some of their data for things like this. I'm going to show that in our Brightmetrics application. Look, obviously, I hope you're intrigued and give our product a shot, but we're not the only way to get at this data. I've intentionally picked metrics that you can get from multiple places. So we're going to spend a lot more time talking about how to use this data rather than how to actually pull and extract and find these. So real world examples, not so much about how to get them. There's a lot of different ways to accomplish that. With that, let's dive in. I've created kind of 5 metrics for us to look at today. And there's a mix of things in here that range from things for those of you that are using just the baseline contact center technology, voice only, human agents, all the way to those of you that are on the bleeding edge with new emerging technologies. My goal is to give all of you something you can take away and implement. Our first metric is abandon rate versus wait time. Abandon rate might be the most widely known contact center KPI out there. It's measured as what percentage of your interactions are abandoning before they get connected to someone. But it's always surprising to me, even, almost 10 years on talking about data analytics in contact centers, how often people don't know how to use this metric effectively and what to do when it's off kilter. First up, let's talk a little bit about what the right target is for abandon rate. Normally, the best target for abandon rate is somewhere in the 4 to 8% range. Note, there are exceptions. For anybody that works in emergency medical services or other things, you're typically driving for an abandon rate that's 0. No one wants to call a 911 operator and wait on hold. That's not what they're shooting for. And you'll staff appropriately for those. But for your average customer service contact center, typically 4 to 8% is the right range. Now, how do we derive at that? That's what this chart is helpful for. This is a great chart. I've used this for years. It comes from a guy named Jeff Rumberg of a company called MetricNet. And what it's comparing is on our y-axis, customer satisfaction, to call abandonment rate down on the x-axis. Basically, if you look at this zone that's right, can you guys see my mouse? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so right here, you're looking at 0 to 4% abandon rate. And you'll notice that the average CSAT is pretty consistent in that range. So if you accomplish a sub 4% abandon rate, typically you're going to have to staff up significantly to do that, and you're not getting that much of a meaningful rise in customer satisfaction. And the reasons for this are pretty logical as you think through it. I'm sure all of you have before called into, again, I don't know, pick on the cell providers or your internet provider, and as you're calling, your doorbell rings or your mom calls or something like that, and you say, oh, I'm going to take this. You're not a frustrated customer. You elected to kind of jump out of queue in that case. There are some abandons that are not frustrated customers, and so it's okay to have some abandons. Driving to 0 is not the goal. On the flip side, though, as we kind of run through this highlighted range of 4 to 8%, you see CSAT starts to dive off a cliff once you get past that 8%. And so that's where that metric comes from. Some people hone that in a little bit more and say, oh, we're targeting 6%. Again, if you don't have a starting point, this is a great place to start. So that's the established target. But when there's a problem, what do? Well, when there's a problem, the first thing I want you to go look at is wait time. So again, the overall kind of metric that we're looking at is abandoned percentage versus average wait time. Wait time is how long do your customers wait in queue before getting to an agent. When we overlay these two metrics, we can quickly start to identify some things. And this is where we're going to get into some real world examples. So I'm going to flip over. I created a dashboard for us today. It's called Experience 2024. This dashboard looks at a variety of kind of common metrics, and we're going to move through a few of these. But what I want to highlight for you first and foremost here is, let me actually zoom this in a little bit because it looks a little small for you guys up there. There we go, that's probably better. So I want to look at this particular set of charts right here. On the left-hand side, you'll see percent abandoned trending over 30 days, and on the right-hand side, you'll see average queue time. You can notice I can highlight and see the exact correlation between those two charts. Ultimately, what I see is there's a rise in abandon rate in recent term for this group, but when I drill down into this particular chart, the view that I want to get into, and this is where I would encourage you to go, I have the same chart up here, but we're going to play around with a reporting view of this. I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to pull the disposition down into columns. Disposition is what happened after the interaction left the queue. For the most part, abandoned and answer in here. I'm going to grab the hour of day and slot this into rows. And then I already have the abandon rate percentage on my report here. I'm going to pull one more thing into this. I'm going to grab that wait time. And this is going to give us a lot of information that we can quickly derive some insights from. So first and foremost, notice over on the right-hand side here, the total. I can see by hour of day, the number of interactions, the abandon rate, and the average wait time. And I can see the averages at the bottom. This particular queue is struggling a little bit. They're trying to optimize their abandon rate right now. They have a 27%. Doesn't really matter what the number is at the bottom. Ultimately, you want to be able to look at this by hour of day or even by day of week, or there's other segmentations you can play with. But what I see here is that the problem spots where the abandon rate is the highest is during the morning hours, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's the first target. Okay, something's wrong during those hours of the day. But what's wrong exactly? That's where your wait time comes in. The average wait time overall is 12 minutes. But during that 10 o'clock hour, the average wait time is 14 minutes overall, but abandoned callers are hanging up at 11 minutes and 30 seconds. What that tells me is, in general, customers are willing to wait about 12 minutes here. Now, there's no industry benchmark for wait time. That's a customer conditioning thing. When I call my internet provider, I know I'm gonna wait. I'm in it for the long haul, and I will just wait, ultimately. Your customers have the same sort of conditioning. It doesn't mean dropping your wait time won't make them happy, but when it comes to abandon rate, they have somewhat of an expectation. And sometimes that might be 15 seconds, sometimes that might be 15 minutes. But that tells you how long your customers are willing to wait. And if you want to drive that abandon rate down, you need to figure out how to get your average overall underneath that number. And then from there, the question is, okay, well, what do we do next? So going back to our slides here, ultimately, there's a lot of different ways you could tackle this problem. At the end of each metric, I have a little key takeaway slide. You can feel free to take a picture of this. It's just a little recap of the whole thing. But that bullet point at the bottom gives you some ideas of things to start to try. So if you have an abandon rate problem like this, play around with, well, what do they hear while they're waiting on hold? What can you do to transfer them to an alternate path? Something like email, which is asynchronous and can be slower, or if you're using emerging technologies like AI, transfer them out to a bot. You could increase staffing, but obviously not everyone has the money to do that. And you could also offer things like callbacks. There are all sorts of things that you can do. But what you want first is a baseline that you can measure so that as you implement those things, you can judge, are they making a difference? So that's metric one. And by the way, we're gonna have some time for Q&A at the end, so if you have questions, don't worry, we'll get into all that a little bit later. Our next metric shifts away from the customer's experience while they're waiting on hold or in queue to their experience once they get connected to agents. This metric is handle average versus transfer rate. These metrics combined will help you spot individual agents that are delivering subpar experiences. Handle average is the amount of time that an agent spends engaged in an interaction, and that includes talk, hold, and wrap time. Transfer rate is the percentage of interactions that an agent transfers to another destination. So again, going back to my whole war story, when I talk to people that aren't in our industry, what are the two things that someone who's not in our industry complains about our industry? I waited too long and I got transferred 30 times. Those are the two big complaints that people bring up. So this one hits on that second one a little bit. Here's what you want to do. You want to find a cohort of agents that have the same job function, skill set, and training. So a lot of contact centers have like level 1 and level 2 agents. You'd want to just look at the level 1 agents together and just look at the level 2 agents together. From there, you can map those agents relative to the cohort average onto a matrix like this. So the center lines along the top, you can see percentage of interactions transferred. The center line is the average for that cohort. And then on the left-hand side, you can see average handle time. The center line there is the group average for the team. And then you can just loosely map your agents based on whether or not they're high or low in those two metrics. I'm going to walk through these one at a time, starting with the upper left, the one in blue. When an agent has a high handle average time, they're spending a lot of time engaged in the interaction, and they have a high transfer rate, they're passing a lot of things off, they're usually new. They're spending a lot of time trying to understand the customer, but ultimately having to pass things along. As long as they're new and you're properly training them, this should all go away and be totally fine. It's nothing to worry about. If they're not new, it's a red flag and an opportunity for you to coach or dig a little bit deeper. Moving down from there, the red one is the one, if you walk away with anything from this matrix, walk away with the red one, go run this and find these people right now. These are people with agents with low handle times and high transfer rates. So low handle time, high transfer rate. These are your biggest opportunity. These agents may be rushing through calls or just lazily passing things off that they could otherwise handle. These create huge problems for customer experience, and you want to deal with them as quickly as possible. Moving over to the right side, look, in general, low transfer rates are really good, but when coupled with low handle times, that dig deeper section, which is yellow, but doesn't look super yellow on that screen. Go take a look, see what other data you have. Do you have post-call surveys or CSAT information or anything about that? Sometimes somebody who has a low handle time, even if they solve the problem, they don't solve it optimally, and the customer can feel a little bit undervalued and ignored, so dig in there. And then ultimately, your best agents are usually right at about average or slightly above your average handle time with a low transfer rate. They're making sure the customer feels helped while the problem is solved for them. Again, real world example here, if we pop back to that first dashboard that I was looking at, you can see here that I have this agent comparison chart here. And ultimately, I've got all these metrics in this chart, but you can see I just went through and highlighted that coaching opportunity, the low handle time with a high transfer rate. And I've got those highlighted. I can also dig deeper into this data to kind of mow through everyone. Now, I'll tell you, in this particular case, I haven't necessarily segmented this to a like cohort, so there's some big swings in here. I don't have all the context around these agents, but let's assume for simplicity's sake, they're on an even playing field. The average at the bottom here is 5%. And for transfer rate, and the average handle time is about 21 minutes. What I can look for is agents that are outside those deltas. So somebody like, I think Fran here, yeah, Fran's a good example. Fran has a 13% transfer rate, high transfer rate, and has a 23-minute average handle time. Could be new, could be a problem. On the flip side, if we find someone like Lucas here, Lucas has 17 minutes, so about 4 minutes lower than our average, and an 11% transfer rate. That would be someone in that coaching opportunity area. Easy way, find those people, figure out what's wrong, go listen to some of their recordings. If you have a tool where you can drill down into those recordings, you can dive a little bit deeper and start to understand, okay, here's what I think's wrong, here's how we kind of coach them towards that green area up and to the right. And the one caveat, no matrix is ever perfect, but in a matrix like this, there really could be another kind of line up along the top here where if someone has a low transfer rate, but they have a really high handle time, that's not good either. That's not optimal for operational efficiency. So bear that in mind, but it's a quad matrix. You can only do so much with it. So here's your key takeaways. Ultimately, find that cohort of agents, look at these two metrics. And again, the biggest takeaway to look for is those agents with a low handle time and a high transfer rate. All right, up next, real-time schedule versus actual. If anybody is a repeat offender here from my presentation last year, you might remember this one. This is something that a customer of ours sat alongside me last year and showed off their real example. I like it so much that I bring along and encourage people to use it frequently. Ultimately, this takes a look at, if you're using schedules in Genesis, this is a way to look at what is an agent scheduled to be doing, so what are they supposed to be doing, versus what are they actually doing. And there's a few different ways that can play out. There's negative ways that can play out and positive ways that play out. By being able to look at this in real time, you can quickly identify for a supervisor where do you need to employ your efforts, whether to reinforce a positive behavior or solve a negative problem. Again, let's jump back over here. We'll take a look at the real world example. If we go back to our dashboard, I've got a second dashboard on here, this real-time agent performance. And this center chart is going to load in with a list of agents. There's a bunch of data on here. What I want to highlight for you is two fields. One is ACD status. ACD status shows me what are they currently doing. So there's some people that are off queue, some that are interacting, and we might see some idle in here, but it looks like they're pretty busy right now. And then we have scheduled activity category. Scheduled activity category is what are they supposed to be doing according to their schedule. There are three different things to look for in here. One is the guys in red. Let's see if we can find one. Yeah. Someone in red is someone who's scheduled to be on queue, but is not on queue. This is where you physically or metaphorically get out of your chair, whether that's, going and finding that person in the office, or that's, Teams, Slack, et cetera, to kind of get a hold of them. But where are they? Why aren't they on queue? Let's solve that problem. Next up is a positive reinforcement. Green is anybody who's interacting but is scheduled to be off queue right now, whether that's in a meal or a break or something like that. That's someone who's going above and beyond the call of duty. They're doing what they can to kind of help out in a busy situation. And then the last color, this group's busy right now, so we're not going to see this one, but in purple, typically if an agent is idle for longer than 5 minutes, they'll pop up. That's an opportunity for redistribution, whether that's, hey, I've got a side project for you to work on here, or it's something like, we have another queue that's just getting slaughtered today. Can you please just jump over and help them out if you have some cross-functional teams like that? So that is how to use this real-time schedule versus actual. And again, on this little takeaway, I've got the write-up of those three things. Again, the colors are totally up to you. I particularly like in order red, green, and purple or blue. So I'll give you a second if you want to take a picture there. All right, onward. Metric 4. So getting to the end, to the side of things, we've talked about some of the basic things, abandon versus wait time. Any contact center can use those. Real-time schedule versus actual, you need to be using schedules in Genesis, but most customers that we talk to are using that. When we get into the next couple, I wanted to talk about the bleeding edge emerging technologies. I highly doubt that anyone in this room isn't at least thinking about AI, if not using it already. And there's a lot of different veins to leverage AI. There are things like agent assist, there is automated QA, but I wanted to highlight the side that is very transparent to your customers, which is when a customer is engaging with a bot. And so I came up with a couple metrics that we'll talk about around AI bots. And look, there's no doubt that AI is going to revolutionize words hard. There's no doubt that AI will continue to revolutionize our space. But remember that whole thing that Forrester said about 1/3 of us are going to launch harmful or biased experiences. It's powerful. AI is very powerful. It's likely also a culprit behind the decline in CX quality. So here's some ways to test the effectiveness of AI or plan it as you're beginning to implement it. The first metric is what I'm calling offload percentage. What percentage of interactions humans used to take are now offloaded to bots? There's two parts to this metric. First is for those of you that haven't yet implemented AI in this fashion. If you're thinking about doing this, what you want to do is go look through your historical data. Hopefully you're using something like skills-based routing or wrap codes to classify the types of interactions that are coming into your contact center. What you want to do with that data is figure out, well, what are the simple ones that we could begin offloading to AI? And then what I want you to do with that is actually measure as a percentage, what percent of your interaction volume are those things taking up? So again, I'll show you just a couple charts that I created for this. If we pop over here and I scroll down, these three charts that you see in this line right here are skills and wrap code rated. This particular customer uses skills on the front end, so they have an IVR that's asking what is the customer reaching out about. They make a selection, they're routed from there. They do just a little bit of wrap codes. I threw it in there just to show you an example of what that might look like. But ultimately, I can look here and I can see, okay, well, look, general support's too broad. We're not going to offload that to AI. Password issues are sensitive. We don't want to deal with that. But something like connectivity and login issues, sure, that's something that is pretty rinse and repeat. It's a type of interaction that we think is very similar every time we deal with it. And then I can look over here and I can see, okay, that makes up about 17% of our interactions. That's the data that you want as you start to think about implementing this. If we pop back in here, that's the data you want to go into this. But then once you've begun implementing the bot, pay attention to the overall percentage decrease in human interactions. Note, this is not solve rate. So ultimately, you're going to get out of the bot data that says, oh, this is the number of interactions that ended with the bot. What that doesn't tell you is how many times a human ended an interaction with a bot and then popped back around, that customer popped back around and found another way to reach out and engage with the company. I do this all the time. People want me to chat. I'm old school. I'm an older millennial. I ultimately still like to use my phone. I'm a sales guy by trade too. And so I reach around the kind of chat or the bot and find my way to get to a human. Solve rate alone doesn't tell you when that's happening. What does tell you is the percentage of the interactions that your humans are taking declining over time. And so that's what you want to look at. If last month we had 1,000 interactions for this particular group and that drops off to, I don't know, 80 interactions, that's an indication the bot's making a meaningful difference because those customers are likely getting what they need there. Obviously, there's other ways to tackle this. Look at, post-interaction surveys with bots or CSAT scores and so forth. But pay attention to that offload percentage. You're implementing this for operational efficiency, but if you're taking the same number of interactions, it means that your customers are just getting frustrated with that bot and running around to you anyway. And so that's the goal with offload percentage here. And again, that wrap code and skills data can be really helpful for kind of targeting some metrics around that. Now, here's the thing that I want to say in this. We looked at that example in the data. 17% was the number. You should not expect that if you spin up a bot tomorrow and if you're offloading a particular use case that represents 17% of your interactions, you should not expect that you're going to have a 17% decrease in interaction volume. AI is not that good yet. Set a reasonable target. But if you're finding that it's only making a nominal decrease, it's time to consider making a change there. My second metric for those of you that are implementing AI, something to think about as you're playing around with this, is human transfer rate post-bot. We've already talked about transfer rate in one form today. That's transfer rate for interactions that are flowing through the queue compared with average handle time. This is a little bit different. This has nothing to do with agent performance. There are going to be times when a bot needs to transfer to a human. They're not perfect. It's just how it is for right now. Who knows what our overlords will have for us later on. What you care about is whether or not the bot's transferring to the right place. Again, go back, what's one of those most common things that people complain about in our industry? Oh, I got transferred a bunch of times. Your bots are going to initiate transfers to humans. What you want to know is, did the bot get it to the right place? Or did the human have to say, that's not me, let me get this somewhere else. And so paying attention to your transfer rates for interactions post-bot will give you a really easy way to kind of understand, oh, there's a certain percentage of the interactions that are flowing in that are transferring at a higher rate than we would expect for human-led interactions. So pay attention to that metric. It'll commonly surface some routing problems, and then you can go back and tweak and play around with it. So we've covered a lot, 5 different metrics. Those are things to get you started. There's obviously a wealth of other things that you can and should look at. But I wanted to give you just a few simple starting points that you could implement by the end of today if you wanted. In summary, we in CX are integral to our organizations. Poor customer experiences can drive unnecessary churn and customer loss. But by carefully measuring and optimizing your operations, coaching your agents, and intelligently approaching emerging technologies, you can turn customer service into a massive asset for your organization and create famed, loyal customer bases like Tesla or Nordstrom. A Salesforce study that I read sums it up pretty well. 78% of customers will do business with a brand again after a mistake is made if the customer service is excellent. That is the power that you guys wield, and this is your aim, and this is how you become an asset shifting customer loss to loyalty. With that, we can open it up for QA. We're done a little bit early. I didn't want to bore you guys. You're going to sit in a bunch of presentations today. My contact info is on the slide. I've also got my associate Noah's in the back. Look for the bright orange shoes. We're happy to answer questions. But are there any questions? You can raise your hand. Any questions I can answer live? Yeah.
Is real-time schedule versus action?
Yeah.
Is that just the same thing as adherence versus conformance?
Yes and no. So the output, the measurement of adherence and conformance is looking at that at scale. So it's
the whole
Yeah, it's a great way to see for an agent, oh, how frequently are they out of alignment? Right. But that real-time view is much more tactical in who's out of alignment right now so that I know how to move my body to deal with that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, good question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, you're pulling up metrics and ways to measure it. I think the one elephant in the room, right, is how do you get the organization to understand that customer experience is a holistic thing?
Sure.
It's not a siloed approach.
Sure.
And then how do you actually utilize the statistics that you're using now to help drive that conversation? Because that's honestly the conversation I think every organization is having a problem with. Because George is like, I'm not in tech.
Yeah.
And, you know, back then,
Totally. Well, look, I'll answer this probably the best way I can from my own personal experience. I'm my title is nominally VP of Sales. I also manage our support and CS teams. I don't, you teed me up perfectly. I'm not doing this to toot our own horn. We have great customer satisfaction. We track CSAT and NPS, and consistently the thing that people call out in those surveys is, oh, your support team, I love them. They call them out by name. Michelle, actually you just mentioned Michelle earlier today. Michelle, Andrea, I love these people, they're great. So what I would say is a first step to justifying your value to the organization, if you're not tracking CSAT or NPS or something like that and getting some free-form comments, that's a great place to start. That can provide some really valuable information for you to feed back to the organization and say, no, this really matters to people, is a starting point. And then there's, there's other places you can go beyond that using not necessarily that direct feedback data. That's the most valuable thing. There's other data that we can start to kind of cobble and pull together to show off, hey, look, we're doing our part. Here's all the kind of different benchmarks that we're hitting that are recommended across the industry. Some of the things I've shown you today, there's other things to look at. We're doing our part. We're not the problem here if they're pointing the gun at you. So, does that help?
It does.
Cool.
I think it's just a challenging way to how you navigate it. Because it's not
It
even
is.
about who's the problem.
Yeah.
It's about the fact that normally, like for me specifically, my group, I own the telecommunications platform for the organization.
Yep.
I have to be the whisperer for the business because
Yep.
business doesn't speak tech, tech doesn't speak
Totally.
business. And then it becomes my responsibility trying to change in the world.
Yep.
Try to get everybody to see that what Sue is doing is impacting
Yep.
the building. Whether it's me, I'm not taking the hit. My system's up. I'm good.
Yep.
But to drive the actual
Yep.
experience forward, you all have to be on the same page. It's
Yep.
hard to navigate those
Totally.
conversations.
Yep. Corporate alignment.
Oh, I'm a change management specialist.
Other questions? All right. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure presenting for everyone today. If you want to stick around and ask us questions, we're here by all means. We've got a booth over in the Expo Center. You're welcome to swing by. And look, I obviously hope you'll stop by, give us a shot. Our product can help with some of this analytics stuff. I think you've seen a little bit of it today. Our customers genuinely love us, and we eat our own dog food. We have great customer service. We love to see if we can help you guys out. With that, enjoy the rest of the show. Thanks so much for coming and listening to me talk for, I don't know how long this went, 30 minutes or something like that. So, thanks everyone.